welcome back. This is session 4 of the Blessing of Church, and today we are talking about the blessing of singing, something I might know a little bit about and something I might have a slight bias about as we're talking about it. But Scripture has over 400 references to singing, at least 50 of which are direct commands. Sing a new song to the Lord is one example we think of a lot, but we are told to sing to the Lord, and we're also told to sing to one another. Both Ephesians and Colossians say to address or admonish one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord. And so we're supposed to be singing, but why is it that we sing? What makes it so special that when we gather as a church, we can sing and lift one another up and encourage each other with song? And I know I feel incredibly blessed when I get to stand in a congregation or near and hear the singing and participate in the singing and lift my voice. But not everybody has that natural feeling that I do. So I want to start this off with a simple question. We're supposed to sing, but what about someone who just isn't good at singing? What if you're not very musical?
I feel like you're singling me out, Nate. So I'll answer that one.
Okay.
As someone who isn't musical and someone who it took a long time for me to learn how to clap on beat. It's not something that was, I could just feel when the beat was going to be and know kind of instinctively. I had to learn what a beat was and when to clap and still sometimes get it wrong. And I've joked that this is my singing voice right here, which my boys could attest to. Yeah, that is what Dad sounds like when he sings. And so it is not natural for me to participate in music, but I can say there's a huge encouragement, a huge benefit for me when I participate in congregational singing. And there's a large difference between if I'm just sitting there listening to the music, which is enjoyable in its own way, but there's a large difference between that and actually taking a step out to participate myself and sing. And I'm one of the people that appreciates when the music is very loud, so that I can't hear myself and people around me can't hear. But so whenever we crank it up, I'm like, all right, good, I can crank it up now too. And it's like the more that I participate, the more that I fully engage with the music, kind of the more edifying it is. So I can speak to, I have had encouragement from singing, but I would ask you guys, how would you articulate like what that encouragement is or where it comes from or what is this link between, like I've experienced it, but I'm like, okay, I don't really know what's going on with singing and having encouragement.
Well, I can definitely speak to that, as obviously since I have a bias in this subject. It's very easy for me to sing, and it's something I do as a pleasurable experience. It's when I'm experiencing joy, I often burst into song, but specifically with singing as an act of worship, there's a few layers to it, and one is, for a lot of people, poetry takes communication to a whole new level because you can communicate more than just the facts. You can communicate feeling and purpose and so much more than just the sky is blue. You can paint a picture with poetry. And so for me, singing takes that to an even another level because we're singing words in poetry, but then we're adding melody and even more rhythm and dynamics to it. And so the energy rises and falls. And for me, that relates to the feeling and the emotions of the words that we're singing. And if we're exalting, if we're making a joyful noise unto the Lord, and we can do that in a joyful melody and express ourselves in such a way, or if we're lamenting and we can bring it down and we can sing softly, there's just so much more to that to me than just the words that are coming out of my mouth. And then the second thing is also I can only think of a handful of times where, and sorry, Dan, but I can only think of a handful of times where I left church quoting word for word multiple paragraphs of a sermon. But I can think of times where driving home, I sang every lyric to the song that we sang together as a congregation. And for me to memorize scripture, it takes a long time, and I'm sitting down and really focusing and trying really hard to memorize these passages. Yet someone will make a joke or say a simple 3-word phrase, and that'll just make me think of a song. And the next thing you know, I'm singing the entire chorus of it just because someone said a couple words. Amazing Grace, how, and everybody can complete that line. But if I said 3 lines from a speech, how many people could do that? So the committing to memory part of music is also, of singing, is a huge part of encouragement for me.
Yeah, I think for me, a huge part of it is actually the idea of having someone else kind of come up with the words for a song. So we can't sing a new song to the Lord on our own, but I derive so much encouragement from hearing the lyrics that Christian worship artists have written and just the melodies that they've composed to create these beautiful anthems that we get to sing to God. And I kind of get the same feeling from that as I do when I read the Psalms. So when I think of David and what he's written, I just think, oh, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like that's exactly what I'm feeling in my heart. And I find that same feeling happening when I sing songs that Christian writers have written in the last few decades. I think of times in my life when certain songs have meant a lot to me. And going back to that time when I hear that song and thinking of how God has brought me through a hard time is really meaningful. And also, I do think that sometimes we just have no other response. There's just no other thing that we can do with our bodies. I think of how we could give God glory and show him how worthy he is, and I just can't find any other way to do so other than to burst out into song. And I think that it can encourage us when we're feeling down as well. So I think of times in my life when I felt sad and I just begin to sing or I think of a song, and that helps me kind of get out of that funk, which is really a cool aspect of worship. And I know for me, sometimes in those moments, I do struggle with wanting to sing. I know that might be shocking because we sing all the time, but it is difficult at times when you just don't really feel like it. So I'm wondering, what do we think about when we just don't feel like singing? What are we supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, it may be surprising to some, but I'm constantly on the highs and the lows of, like you said, feeling like singing. Sometimes I can't stop singing, and people are driving people who are near me crazy because I just can't stop singing. And then other times it just takes every bit of effort that I have just to get the words out, get the melody out. And so I experience that pretty often. And the short answer is do it anyway. And I know that's easier said than done. But like I said at the beginning here, that scripture talks about singing more than 400 times. 50 of those times are commands. And so, out of an act of obedience, as we're responding to God, and that's what worship is a response to God. And one of those acts of worship is responding in song. And so, if he wants us to sing to him, and even just acting like Jesus. Jesus sang. It said before they went to the garden, Jesus and the disciples sang a hymn together. So just emulating Jesus and being obedient to what God desires from us is to sing. And that's 50 times in scripture being told to do so. That's a pretty strong command. So in order to follow that, we just need to do it. And in those times when I'm really struggling and not wanting to sing, I'm thinking about something that happened earlier this morning or thinking about something stressful that I have to accomplish later that day. Sometimes it takes all I have just to get the words out, just to get the melody out. But I have also found some of the most powerful and profound times of worship were times when I just wasn't feeling it and I just wasn't in the mood. And all I could think about was lunch in the next 2 hours or something like that. But I find myself, as the words of these wonderful worship songs are rolling off my tongue and they're coming out, and I'm really thinking more about just making sure it happens, I find myself then digging in and finding meaning in those songs and realizing these words that I just sang are starting to be more and more powerful. And we just finished the Christmas season, and I think of the song "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," and how many times have I just said those words and sang those songs even before I was a believer. Yet I come to a line like "God and sinners reconciled," and all of a sudden it just hits me. And those words can hit me because I was obedient and I was singing anyway. So it doesn't always happen, but in those times of struggle, and in those times where we're just not feeling it, we go to God and we sing to him anyway out of obedience, which is saying, "God, thank you. I love you. I'm going to do what you asked me to do." And then sometimes I'm even praying, "God, help me to feel what I'm saying as I say it." And sometimes, often, it actually happens that way. Well, I hope we've given you some things to think about. Singing is such a big topic and such a big part of our gathering time. So we'd encourage you to talk and pray together and think about times where singing together in a group has meant a lot to you. Think about how you came together and lifted up a melody to the Lord, to each other, to the Lord, all together, and how has singing helped your worship and gathering time.